How do you balance pushing yourself to be a great doctor while also making sure your own and your family's needs are met? What can a health and wellness coach do for you as a physician, even in an early career stage? My name's Dr. Zhen Chan. I'm a pediatrician and co founder of Grapevine, a company dedicated to improving how we physicians match the jobs and providing that support through our professional journeys. And these are just a few of the questions we'll be tackling on today's episode of Physician's Guide to Doctoring with Dr. Amna Shabbir.
Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Physician's Guide to Doctoring by a new interviewer to the pod featuring a very familiar interviewee. My name is Zen, and today I have the pleasure to interview Dr. Amna Shabbir, founder and CEO of Amna Shabbir Wellness Coaching and the Early Career Physicians Institute. She is a Master Certified Life Coach and National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach, a dual Board Certified Geriatrician-Internist, and supermom to two young girls. She has frequently been on this side of the podcast experience, but today she is in the hot seat. So, Dr. Shabbir, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I love being on this side of the seat and happy to be here.
Awesome. I want to just dive right into all the questions. I hope that our audience can gain a lot of insight into how to better their careers and how to use coaching, what coaching is, and learn all of that. So, if it's okay with you, I'll dive right in.
Absolutely.
First thing, many physicians decide to spend a year or a few after residency to work as an attending, maybe take on a hospitalist position or just work in primary care, something like that, before pursuing a fellowship. I learned that's something that you did as well. Can you tell me what were some of the determining factors that went into that career step, that went into you picking a fellowship and then now working as a physician wellness coach?
We like to think of things as everything has to be planned and life has to have a linear progression. I'm going to do residency and then I'm going to do fellowship. Had you asked me in residency, are you going to become a geriatrician? I probably would have shaken my head and said no. And fellowship was nowhere in my horizon at that time in my mind. What I was passionate about was practicing primary care. I was a primary care track resident. This was the career that I was supposed to embrace and retire in. And I didn't see myself doing anything else full time ever. So this was the view that I had. And I knew it was going to be hard, but I was not prepared for how hard and how disempowered I would feel as a primary care physician practicing in a traditional healthcare system. That was really a series of where I started becoming very disillusioned with the way we practice medicine. And although, again, I knew it was going to be hard, I knew that there was going to be an in-basket and all the other needs and demands of the work that primary care is. But it's when you're in the trenches that you start to realize, and just the sheer exhaustion. I'm a human being, just the sheer exhaustion. So I think I'm trying to think back at the time. Every time I get this question, I come up with a new insight. I burnt out in the first couple of months after training. And it was very real. And I took that as a personal slight, as I'm not tough enough. And that's why I burnt out early. So fast forward 4 years in practicing full-time primary care. And by then I had another child. By then I had been practicing for 1 whole year in the pandemic, 1 year in some months. I asked myself this question. I wanted to walk away from medicine completely. This is it. I'm done. And what still gave me joy in medicine? And working through that question, I realized that I love taking care of older adults. The more complex, the better, and talking to families. And that's where I told myself, okay, I guess I'm becoming a geriatrician. So I applied for residency. The application was closing in maybe a week and a half. I think that was the amount that was left. So I applied, I got in to the program of my choice. I was very delighted. And going back into medical training was its own journey, definitely insightful, but my way of healing from burnout was actually more medical training. So was not a very thought out process, but life brought me there, and I'm actually grateful that it did.
And then how did then the wellness coaching piece come in and making that transition?
Life is a funny thing. I would say parallel journeys happening all the time. Even before I went into medical school, I was enamored by positive psychology. I read The Seven
Mm.
Habits of Highly Effective Teens when I was around 13, 14 years old. And I went to my mom and I said, I want to do whatever this is. And she looked at me like a concerned South Asian physician mom. And she said, I don't know what this is. You're becoming a physician, end of story. Like I look back and I had always read books surrounding positive psychology, optimizing life, high performance, all those things really were a passion of mine way before coaching was formally introduced as a thing in my life. But also, the passion for medicine was crawling simultaneously side by side. And I believe that all those books that I was reading and the material that I was consuming was actually helping me during my medical education. Fast forward, went through personal lived experience of burnout, postpartum depression, physical challenges, mental health challenges, all of these combined made me realize, and I also got coached. This is the journey which many
Mm.
people are on simultaneously. I'm so glad that I got coached even before the pandemic hit because then I had some tools in my toolkit to deal with what was coming ahead. I just look back at the time where I felt like I needed somebody in my corner, helping me, cheering me on, actually coaching me with specific skills that I could use. And that's when, after fellowship, I realized, okay, this is it. I need to go and actually do that thing that was always a passion of mine. And I got my coaching certifications and started working with my clients. And it's been such a wonderful, joyous experience. And as is when you do medicine, you want to learn all the things. And that's why I did initially my wellness coaching. I am certified in health coaching and life coaching. So I take all of those techniques that I learned and I combine them to create a unique experience for the clients that I'm working with.
That is awesome. That's super inspiring. And I often wonder if having coaches available during residency, during medical school, so that we have some of these, like you said, tools at that stage would just better prepare us for practice because you see so many people, so many physicians burning out. And I know there was a report that said burnout was lower than it has been in several years this year, but it's still over 50%. So it's still high. But I just wonder if having more coaches available at an earlier stage would have just prepared us all a little bit better. You mentioned something earlier about that exhaustion and one of the symptoms of burnout, and you felt it even early on in your career. For residents and fellows, you ask anyone, no one's going to tell you they're not exhausted. Everyone is tired and fatigued, right? Like we have those 80-hour work weeks and all that. How might you coach a physician at that stage, at that early stage, to deal with that inner voice in the back of the mind that's saying, "Oh, you're not allowed to be burnt out yet. If you're burnt out now, you're not a good doctor." What do you say to people who ask you that question?
I want to pause and backtrack a little bit to the earlier comment that you made, Zen, which was, I wonder if we had access to these tools earlier, would that be helpful? We
Mm,
actually have data that tells us that it is helpful.
okay.
Coaching is evidence based. We have randomized control trials that show that coaching helps decrease burnout, improves quality of life, flourishing. There's like RCTs
Wow.
out there that have been published in JAMA. We know what works. But the question is, and we know that physicians are burning out, and many people show concern. So, a lot of times, what I feel is that organizations are misplacing their resources sometimes, such as I know places that are creating like wellness rooms and yoga rooms. Like, who
Hmm.
is going to
Hmm.
go and do yoga in the middle of a crazy 26, 30 patient hour day? So, while the system changes are very different, you absolutely need to work on the logistical burden that physicians and other clinicians are going through. But we also know that coaching works, and it is an I would say an integral component of any well-being plan, and all serious organizations are now actually looking into it being
Hmm.
an integral part of the plan. So, yes, it works. The question is, are you serious enough to get your employees and your clinicians the help that they need?
Bring that
Now,
resource in.
coming
Yep.
to the second question that you've asked, I know exactly how to talk to that voice because I had that voice for the longest time ever. If I look back in time and I could change one thing, I could get this question, what would be the one thing you would change? It is to talk to myself a bit more kindly. Because what happens in medicine is we take compassionate humans with a higher calling and a
Hmm.
purpose,
Hmm.
and then we systematically dehumanize them while teaching them empathy, We all remember those lessons on how
Yeah.
to care for our patients, how to appreciate their pain. But meanwhile, also don't cry. Don't feel the pain. You are supposed to stay awake. I don't know any physician who had to go to the bathroom and actually went to the bathroom at the time that they needed to go. So absolutely create this split. You disembody yourself completely. And then when you actually lean in and realize how bad this was, because for me, after fellowship, it took about 7 months and multiple doctor visits. I don't talk about this part of my journey to help me figure out what was going on with me. I had so many different physical symptoms. And even now, like my dentist the other day, she asked me, do I clench my jaw? I'm like, I don't clench my jaw.
Oh,
I never clench my jaw. And then she made me palpate my jaw, and I saw how all the muscles were hypertrophied.
oh my
And I
gosh.
had limited jaw opening just because of all physical manifestations of stress. If you are a medical student and a resident or a fellow or an early career physician and you're feeling tired and exhausted, it's okay. Congratulations, you're a human. And is something that you have to start realizing the fallibility in a profession that promotes maladaptive perfectionism already, even if you're not a physician, just by the currency of being alive in this day and age, you are susceptible to having all three types of perfectionism. Now, take you and your drive and you put you in as a medical student, as a resident, as a fellow, all of this is going to just get worse. You just have to take a deep breath and go stand in front of the mirror and look at yourself, like literally look at yourself. And when you look back, what is looking back at you is not AI, it's not a computer, it's not a robot, it's a human being. And I just recommend asking yourself this question: the way you talk to yourself, would you talk to a loved one like that? Would you talk to the patient who
Yeah.
the room that you just left, would you talk to that patient like that? And why is it so hard to talk to yourself and give yourself the common courtesy that any person walking down the street deserves? And we are so hard on ourselves. And we feel that, and I say we because I am part of that. For the longest time, I felt that if I was self compassionate, if I was self kind, I would become complacent. And if I spoke with to myself with kindness, my grades would go in the toilet, my ambitions would be flushed, and I would be on the street. I don't know what's going to happen. To
Yeah.
that point, nothing is going to happen. Research shows time and time again that by practicing self compassion, you are going to trigger intrinsic motivation and you are actually going to flourish and go better in your career. You're probably going to have more longevity in medicine. So please allow yourself to be human.
I appreciate that so much. I wish I got this advice when I was a resident. And you mentioned you're not going to the bathroom on time. Sometimes I was going to the bathroom unnecessarily, not to use the bathroom. It was to have a quiet moment, to think about some tragedy that just happened, think about the stress or maybe even a bad interaction with a colleague and things like that. And having to wipe a tear away and just go right back to work because the next patient is there and the next task needs to be done. Do appreciate everything that you just said. That was about the inner voice. Sometimes now we have to deal with people just at work and talking with older physicians from a different generation. And when it comes to that, I often feel like the discourse gets a little negative and not super productive. You often feel or you hear that from older physicians, oh, younger doctors these days don't seem to care about patients the same way we did. We didn't even have work hours in residency. They're so nice that they have 80 hours limits. No one seems to see being a physician as a calling anymore. And from a younger physician's perspective, including my own, I'm seeing all of the older ones burning out and like being very dissatisfied and being dehumanized, like you just said. And we're fighting for what we're fighting for because of what we're seeing. One of the biggest questions I always have is how do we bridge the gap in this discourse, make it more productive, and reduce that us versus them mentality between the different generations of doctors?
Excellent question. And I love that you're asking about bridging the gap. Let's all
Hmm.
take a deep breath and realize that we're all on the same side of the table.
Yeah.
This is not a rivalry or hostility. I have deep compassion for my senior colleagues when they say this, because when people are lashing out, it is a way of manifesting trauma. They have gone through what they have gone through, and they have been programmed to say these things because people said those things to them, and they
Mhm.
didn't have work hours. Yeah, they didn't. And it was awful and it was hard. The question right now is, and clearly we're recognizing that this doesn't work. And that's what a lot of senior colleagues are also recognizing, like this is not working. All senior colleagues are not saying this, and all junior colleagues are not behaving the same way. Aware of all or none thinking, be aware of us versus them thinking, and build a bridge. Take a deep breath and recognize that we are all bonded collectively in the trauma that is medical education, and that is the lived experience of being a physician and a clinician. When you try and save your patient and that thing doesn't go through, it is awful. And we have all felt the pain of loss. We have all felt the physical manifestation of exhaustion, of sheer exhaustion. So first, what is common far outweighs what divides us. Just taking a collective deep breath and having compassion for the person making this statement that right now younger doctors are doing this, et cetera, et cetera. I have deep compassion and I invite you to have compassion. But let's not confuse compassion with facts. Compassion allows space for mindfulness and the ability to examine what the facts are. The facts are that we have to stop the trauma transfer cycle that we are all going through. And where does this end? So can you be a trauma stopper? Can you stop giving? This is just the same way that we say trauma is inherited, trauma is passed genetically. This is the same way that we're just giving the trauma that we went through to our younger colleagues. And if we do QI and we do research and we do systems improvement, there is always room for improvement. Even in the best case scenario, there's always room for improvement. And that goes for medical education. That goes for the practice of medicine. Our struggles are different, and their struggles were different. Our struggles are that by the time we were done recording, a lot of things that you and I studied are already outdated. Our struggles are those. My dad's a physician, and he showed me his pathology book, and I laughed at the rheumatology chapter, and he was like, "That's not nice." And I said, "Dad, yes, you're right. That's not nice," because it was like very short. And he said the answer it was only steroids. And right now, that's not the only answer.
Yes.
And while that's delightful for all our patients, it's challenging to keep up. It's challenging to keep up. It's challenging to show up. So any physician, if you invite them to sit down and take a deep breath and look at how physicians all over the US are feeling the lack of autonomy, feeling very disempowered, physician suicide rates are extremely high, burnout rates are still high. All of these things, we are all collectively bonded in those things, and we have to collectively change the narrative. So my advice would be compassion and invitation for dialogue
Mhm.
to all sides. And I completely see it. I sit and I talk with patients that are physicians from, they're in their 90s, and we get to chat and they tell me their stories that are remarkable and incredible. So whenever you hear people say that, take a deep breath, invite them for a dialogue, and have compassion.
I will definitely take that to heart next time I chat with someone who brings up any of these comments. I was recently at the National Pediatric Conference, and there were multiple groups. There was the early career physician section, there was the practice management section, and very different generations of physicians in each one. And one of the things that I immediately thought, having attended both of them, I'm like, why are there no events where they're coming together? Like, where's that networking event to have everybody share stories and talk about the current bigger overarching issues and how we can all tackle them together? And so I love the ideas of bridging gaps and forming more connections and getting everyone together like that. That actually goes right into my next question, which is when it comes to burnout, there are some of those individual components and contributions, but there's also, you already talked about, so many of these systemic contributions, the way that the system burns and churns through physicians and the healthcare workforce. What are some challenges? I know that you help organizations make sure they have the right systems in place. As you're in that work, what are some of the common challenges or even just common themes you've noticed many organizations might share? How do you help them systematically overcome some of these challenges?
The organizations that actually care are the ones that are going to make the changes. And I've had conversations with both the kind that care, the kind that don't care.
Hmm.
And one thing I'll say is that people don't leave places just because they had to do 2 extra clicks. They leave an organization because they feel like they don't matter and that they don't belong. Mattering and belonging are very integral to having individuals stay and be happy at the place that they work. While systems and logistics are a big part of the burden of burnout and also the burden of moral injury, if you have a leader in a place that cares for you, first, they're also going to address the burden, but you're also going to feel heard. If we had to look at 100,000 different things, which is what happens when you pick up an organization and a conversation, it's everything, everyone is going to tell you it's very complicated. There are so many layers. And I'm not going to say that it's not complicated,
Mhm.
but I love this quote by Muhammad Ali that it's not the mountain that wear you out, it's the pebble in your shoe. So if you can identify the pebble in your shoe and start working on that, it's going to be huge. There are other organizations, and I want to put a plug for them that are pairing with organizations, and I'm an ambassador for Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation.
Yeah.
They have an incredible program which helps institutes work through, such as one of the things that they're working on is removing hurdles for clinicians seeking mental health care. Are you
Mm.
using appropriate language? So I would encourage people to go to Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation, support them, look at their resources. And one of the things is just part of mattering and belonging is making your employees feel like they can seek help, and every application does not have to have 10 different questions for you to just share that, oh, I'm seeking help for postpartum depression or anxiety. So decreasing the burden, like first you're burning people out, then you're putting hurdles in space where they can't even seek help. They can't ask and go to places. That's one. Be the leader that actually listens and actually cares. Be that person. That's number two. And number three is yes, can we improve systems? All systems can be improved. Can we take away clicks and burdens? Can we start delegating some of the tasks? I mentioned primary care. There's so much help that a primary care physician needs, from prior authorizations, in-basket management. How can you create systems and flows that can remove that excessive burden
Mhm.
from physicians and other clinicians? Also, AI is booming right now.
Yeah, I was about to
And
say that.
we're talking about scribes and all these amazing things. Here's what's happening with organizations that care about their clinicians. They're going to say, okay, here's a scribe situation to make your life easy. Whereas other organizations are going to say, wow, now somebody else can write your note. So can you please see two patients instead of the one patient that you were seeing?
Mm.
When is this madness going to end? And so what's happening is when you look at retention, when you look at turnover, smart organizations care for their employees and they work on retention and they work on burnout. So, for example, one of the studies I was recently looking at coded that a burnt out physician will cost an organization about $81,000 per year. And aggregating everything comes up to losing 2% of the organization's annual budget is lost to just physician burnout.
Yeah.
And so if you're a smart organization, you will invest in metrics and you will make your employees feel like they care. And the downstream effect will then be that your patients will feel like they are being taken care of. Inclusion and belonging is important. And then how can you take away burden and be a leader that listens?
Yeah, you mentioned lost or the cost of that burnout and that lack of retention. I actually read a statistic that inclusive of the lost revenues and the turnover and everything, a big organization can lose $6,000 to $8,000 a day. A plug for family medicine, pediatrics, and just primary care in general, because of how they are this sort of gatekeeper to the rest of the system and all the referrals that are being done, the labs that are being done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The return on investment of keeping a primary care physician in your system is actually tremendously high. There was one survey, I believe from 2023, that showed a family doctor has a 8.8x return on investment comparing their annual salary to the amount of revenue that can be generating through the services they provide. So that's enormous. And that's why I think it's not just good to retain people because culture and whatnot. It's good for your bottom line too, frankly. So I'm glad that you mentioned and touched upon that. I want to switch gears a little bit and allude to some things that you had mentioned in previous interviews and writings that you've done. So back in September of 2023, you had written a poem called Just a Doctor, and that was shared on the Doctors on Social Media network with Dr. Donna Coriel. I won't read it, but I'll put it in the show notes so that everyone can read it. I think it was wonderful. My biggest takeaway from that poem was that sometimes you just want to talk to someone who gets it. And I think you talked about that in the beginning when it came to you being inspired to being a wellness coach. In a career that can often feel isolating because of how hard it is to talk about the work that you're doing with your usual support systems like your parents, your friends, or your partner, who do you suggest physicians turn to if they need that extra support?
Thank you for reading the poem and for mentioning this, Zan. There are so many layers of community, and we have to realize that we are part of a society that has really promoted the individualistic identity, like bootstrapping everything, right?
Mhm.
I should be able to deal with all of this, and that's just not right. And we need to recognize the toll that medical education and the practice of medicine takes on our clinicians. If we don't recognize it, we can't solve for it. If we recognize it, we normalize asking for help, we destigmatize it. So the support system around you and your community can have many layers. I would recommend some layers involve commiseration and venting. That's where you need friends. I want you to hate that person with me. And we just sit down and we just chat and we just relax.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not what's needed. That promotes over identification with negative emotions. So you need somebody that can help you have more objective look at things. So when you need that objectivity and goal focused forward momentum, that's where coaching comes in. So I would encourage reaching out and seeing if you can access coaching. Sometimes you need somebody who can guide you forward, and that's where mentoring comes in. Sometimes you need a little combination of both, and that's where peer support comes in. And these are all different layers. And then sometimes you need therapy and you need counseling and you need clinical help. And whatever season of life you find yourself in, find your community. You do not have to do this all alone. We have been fed a lie. The lie is that everything has to be perfect, including you. You are human. You will fall and you will fail. And you are a physician. You will fall and you will fail. Being a physician does not make you immune to having personal emotions and personal life. I've had a coach for a very long time, and I don't foresee myself not having a coach in some shape or form. And I have mentors and I have friends. There are layers. Life can be so beautiful and so optimized in so many different ways. Why do we have to suffer alone and suffer in silence? That's why I invite you to create layers and community around you. This also takes away the agony of putting stress on one human. Like your parents cannot understand everything that you go through. Your friends can't, and sometimes your partner can't. So you need a point person to understand. You actually definitely need a non-clinical friend to help you recognize how messed up things are in your life because they've been normalized if you have been just surrounded in a clinical community. And sometimes you need somebody who has gone through what you've gone through, which is exactly what it is when you are surrounding yourself with other clinicians. I hope that answers your question.
I think that's perfect because there's the objective people and then there's the ones that you commiserate with. The ones that you commiserate with, they're easy to find because it's after a residency shift, after a hard shift, and you can talk about the day and vent. But it's the objective outlets that are harder to find. And even taking that step to say, I need to talk to a therapist, I need to talk to a coach. That first step, the biggest hurdle. And so I hope that later on in the show notes or wherever else, I can put your information there as well. And people can come to you if they feel like they would really benefit from that one-on-one service. I have one last question. And you mentioned the Muhammad Ali quote, and you've talked about quotes a bit here. I also am someone who loves using quotes as ways to guide life. So I want to allude to two quotes that you have mentioned in the past. One is from a poem called Good Timber by Douglas Malloch. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And you mentioned that you really loved that quote while you were in medical training. I'll read it out real quick. It starts, "The tree that never had to fight for sun and sky and air and light, but stood out in the open plain and always got its share of rain, never became a forest king, but lived and died a scrubby thing. Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees." And then after some time, you recognize your own burnout and how your path has developed. And you notice that quotes like that can really push someone to a point of exhaustion and that mindset of never quitting no matter what. So you found a new quote, and you said this was your new favorite by a writer named Anais Nin. And that one goes, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Life is a process of becoming, a combination of states we have to go through. Where people fail is that they wish to elect a state and remain in it. This is a kind of death. So these two messages, they feel diametrically opposed. And I'm sure that many physicians out there can resonate with either or, and maybe both at the same time. How do you coach physicians, especially those in their early career, who feel they need to walk that tightrope between pushing them as hard as possible to be great at their job, maybe even to be the best pediatrician, the best rheumatologist, or whatever it is, while also being present for other life priorities like raising a family and then really preventing burnout from taking over themselves and trying to juggle all these pieces?
You mentioned two of my favorite quotes, and I still vacillate between both of them. And I think the missing piece is this: how you talk to yourself. And if you believe that one has to be present and while the other cannot be present, which is the thought error over here. For the longest time, I thought that failure was arbitrary and was never an option. Perfectionism was the only way to go. And complacency was accepting or taking a deeper breath and being kind to myself in any shape or form, was excusing my behavior. So the only option was 100% and being there, and whatever there was, whether it was floors, whatever. And it was never for myself or for my family. It was always medicine, all consuming, or something academic. And that's where the first quote helped me. And sometimes it helped me while I was working out.
Yeah.
This is it. Good timber. Let's go. But then it's the ability to recognize, and I would say this and really invite early career physicians and early career clinicians to think of this becoming. It's a process, and there's no such thing as perfectionism. You're human. You can be that person who is out, and you can be fighting and doing all the best things. I don't like to use the word hustling. I don't like to use that word at all anymore. But you can work hard and do your best. And at the end of the day, not beat yourself up, and recognize that it is a process of becoming, and that you will get where you need to go, and that you are doing the best that you could. It's the yearning for allowing your physiologic needs such as rest and sleep and connection with other humans is okay. That does not mean you're lazy. It is okay. It is normal. It is natural. You are fine. Nothing is wrong with you. So two things can simultaneously coexist. You can have desire to be ambitious and to be the best whatever you want to be, and you can also be kind to yourself. The missing piece of the puzzle is your inner narrative. It's your inner dialogue and your acceptance of failure.
You've given a lot of actionable insights today. Thank you for also being very transparent about your own journey. It's not often easy to talk about your own path through burnout. You mentioned postpartum depression, all those things. And so I really appreciate it, and I'm grateful for you being so open today. But those were all my questions. I really want to thank you for being here with me, especially bearing through my first time hosting a podcast episode. Are there any parting thoughts you have for the audience? And for anyone who wants to find you, where can they go?
Thank you so much for having me. You were fantastic. And everyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn at my first and last name, Amna Shabbir. And I'm also on Instagram, dr.amnashabbir. My parting thought with you is, you're listening to this, you're a human being. Allow space for your humanity and be kind to yourself. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. You're fighting the good fight. You're helping individuals, and you're also helping systems be better for the individual physician. So I just really appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. So please share it, or like it, or comment on a social media post, or write us a 5-star review. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.